welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really big question, kind of at the heart of AI economics. All this huge investment pouring into scaling large language models.
Mm.
Does it still make sense?
Hmm.
Especially when, the standard benchmarks like test loss seem to show diminishing returns. Yeah, if you just track those classic numbers, it really does look like progress might be slowing down. But the research we've been digging into argues that maybe those metrics are giving us a bit of an illusory reference.
Hmm.
So our mission today is to look past that test loss and really focus on a capability that might dictate the real commercial value. Something called long horizon execution.
Right, long horizon execution. It's basically the ability of a model to reliably finish a really long, complex task with many steps, not just writing a paragraph. Think more like automating a whole multi-stage process.
Mhm.
And historically, when these models failed, deep into one of these long tasks, the assumption was often, oh, the model can't reason properly, or maybe its planning ability just kind of collapsed.
And this research seems to flip that idea on its head. It's arguing the failure isn't necessarily in the plan itself or even the model's knowledge. It's more about the execution, just consistently doing the steps correctly, one after another for a long time. It's about reliability, really.
Exactly. And here's the counterintuitive bit. By carefully isolating this execution ability, the researchers found something pretty surprising. Those small marginal gains in accuracy, the ones that look like diminishing returns, can actually lead to exponential gains in how long a task the model can reliably complete.
Okay, that's the hook. That could change the whole economic story. Let's unpack this idea of an exponential payoff. So you might put in a ton of compute, get maybe just a tiny 1% bump in single-step accuracy and think, well, that wasn't worth it. But this first key finding suggests that tiny gain compounds massively for task length.
Yeah, you really need to look at the math here to see how it compounds. The researchers define this metric called horizon length. 90 HS-LRs, that's a maximum task length where the success rate stays above some level, $7. And they found, assuming your single-step accuracy, let's call it time hour, is roughly constant, the relationship is approximately HSPS.
Okay, log S over log P. That sounds a bit dry, maybe. Why is that logarithmic relationship such a big deal? You're saying this is where the value lies.
It's a huge deal because of what happens when p-dollar, that single-step accuracy, gets really close to 1 to perfect. The denominator, GHS, gets extremely close to 0 from the negative side. And when you divide by a tiny negative number, the result, HSS, just explodes upwards. The analysis actually showed that once your step accuracy gets past about, say, 70%, the horizon length grows faster than exponential.
Faster than exponential. Okay, so that makes a small 1% gain feel completely different.
Yeah.
If I'm already at like 95% accuracy, another 1% doesn't just get me 1% more task length. It might double it or more.
That's the idea. So for you listening, if the real economic value of an AI agent comes from how many steps it can reliably do on its own, the total task length, then just looking at short task scores or test loss gives you that mirage of slowing progress, as the paper calls it. Meanwhile, the capability that might actually matter most for value, that reliable task length, could still be growing really fast, which might justify continuing those huge compute investments.
Okay, so that's the theory. But how did they actually prove it was execution failing and not planning or knowledge? They had to isolate it, right?
They did. They had to be really careful in the experimental design. They set it up to completely decouple planning and knowledge from the execution itself.
How'd they pull that off? How do you remove planning and knowledge from the equation?
Well, they basically spoon-fed the LLM everything it needed. First, all the knowledge required was given up front, like a simple dictionary mapping words to numbers, nothing complex. And second, they gave it the entire plan, step by step, told it exactly which dictionary keys to look up in which order. So the model didn't have to figure out what to do next, just reliably do it.
I see. So the task itself was?
It was called the Key Value Dictionary Addition task. Simple idea. At each step, the model had to retrieve a value from the dictionary using the key it was given, and then compose that value by adding it to a running total, a sum it had to keep track of in its state. The clever part is, if it failed, it couldn't really be blamed on not knowing the plan or not having the data. It had to be a failure in executing the step or managing that running sum correctly.
Something like a really clean test for execution. What did they find? What was result one?
Result one was pretty stark. Execution all by itself is surprisingly hard for these models. They took a model like Qwen 332b, a decent model. On the very first step, it got 100% accuracy.
Okay, so it understood the task, knew how to add, knew how to look things up.
Right. But even with that perfect start, its accuracy on completing the whole task just plummeted. It fell below 50% successful completions within only about 15 steps.
15 steps. Wow. Okay, that really does point to the difficulty of sustaining execution over time, even when the individual steps are easy.
But then, result 2 brought the good news, kind of validating the scaling idea. They found that scaling up the model size did lead to big improvements in execution length. And crucially, these seem to be non-diminishing gains for the horizon length metric.
Ah, so bigger models could keep that accuracy higher for significantly longer. The horizon length kept growing nicely with scale, unlike the single-step accuracy price.
That's what they saw. A clear positive trend for horizon length, even on this task where knowledge wasn't the limiting factor.
Okay, so if it's not planning, and it's not just a fixed error rate compounding,
Yeah.
why does the accuracy actually get worse as the task goes on? You said it wasn't just simple decay.
Right, you might expect a constant probability of error on each step. But one of their key graphs, figure 4b, shows something else. The accuracy of individual turns actually goes down steadily the longer the task has already run.
Hmm.
The model seems to get progressively worse the deeper into the task it goes.
It gets worse over time. How does that work?
This led them to what they call the self-conditioning effect. It's a critical finding. Basically, models become more likely to make mistakes in the future if their recent history, the context they're looking at, contains errors they made on previous turns. It's almost the opposite of how humans often learn we might get better with practice or by seeing our mistakes. These models seem to get negatively influenced. Past errors make future errors more likely.
Wait a second. So making the models bigger and bigger, that doesn't just fix this. You can have a giant model, but if it makes a mistake, it sort of poisons its own future performance. That sounds like a fundamental problem for building reliable agents.
Well, scaling helps with part of the problem, but not this specific effect, it seems. They ran counterfactual tests to confirm this. They deliberately inject artificial errors into the history they fed the model.
What happened?
As they increased the rate of those fake injected errors, the accuracy of the model on the next perfectly solvable step consistently got worse. It proved the model was being directly hampered by seeing errors in its context, whether its own or artificial ones.
And even the biggest models showed this.
Yeah, that was a really interesting nuance. Scaling up to frontier models, huge ones like DeepSeek V3, 670 billion parameters, or Kimi K2, over 1 trillion parameters, did help a lot with what they called long context degradation. That's just the performance drop from having a very long but error-free history. But even those giants were not immune to the self-conditioning effect. They were still significantly thrown off when their context included past errors. Scaling wasn't enough to fix that core feedback loop.
Okay, so if scaling alone isn't the silver bullet for self-conditioning, we need something else, a different computational approach.
Exactly. And this is where sequential test time compute comes in. You often hear it called thinking or chain of thought, COTI. They found that enabling these kinds of methods seemed to basically fix the self-conditioning problem.
How so?
When they enabled thinking on, say, the Qwen 3 models, the accuracy stayed remarkably stable even when they conditioned the model on history with a high rate of simulated errors. That step-by-step internal reasoning process seems to break the negative cycle.
Interesting. So thinking isn't just about reasoning, it's about execution stability too.
It seems so. And to push this idea further, they looked at how much complexity a model could handle in a single turn. They called this turn complexity K. Like how many retrieve and add steps can it reliably string together in one go?
And what was the baseline for models without thinking enabled?
This was pretty striking. Even those huge frontier models, DeepSeek Z3, Kimi K2, when run without COTI or similar methods, they failed to reliably execute even a turn complexity of K2.
K equals 2. So they struggled to just look up two numbers and add them correctly in one sequence. For models that size, that's quite surprising.
It really highlights the execution bottleneck, but then you look at the models with thinking enabled.
Let me guess, a big difference.
A massive difference.
Yeah.
The benchmark results showed sequential compute, that thinking gave a huge boost. They tested a GPT-5 model, codenamed Horizon, using thinking, and it could execute over 1,000 steps in a single turn.
1,000 steps, okay. And the next best.
The next competitor they listed was Claude Four Sonnet, which managed 432 steps. Still impressive, but Horizon was way out ahead.
So that sequential processing really unlocks a different level of single-turn execution capacity.
It does. And they also noted that other approaches, like parallel compute methods, think majority voting or ensembles, only gave pretty marginal gains for this long horizon execution problem. There seems to be something specific about the sequential nature of thinking that helps maintain state and accuracy.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together then. We started with this idea that maybe diminishing returns from scaling LLMs is a bit of an illusion. And this research suggests if we shift our benchmark from simple single-step accuracy to this horizon length, how long a task can be reliably done, then progress might still be scaling very well.
Right. And the main bottleneck isn't necessarily planning or reasoning up front, but this tricky problem of execution failure over the long haul, driven by this negative self-conditioning effect where errors breed more errors.
And the solutions seem to involve not just bigger models, but models that employ sequential thinking to maintain stability.
And if you dig just a bit deeper into why that key value task was hard, it wasn't the individual operations. The models could look up a value almost perfectly. They could add almost perfectly when those were done in isolation. The real challenge, the researchers concluded, was doing both reliably while also maintaining and updating the state, that running sum. It's a combination of lookup and state management over time that breaks down.
So the provocative thought to leave everyone with, maybe, is that the path to truly capable, reliable AI agents isn't just about making them smarter in a reasoning sense. It might be just as much, or even more, about solving the fundamental engineering challenge of reliable state management over long sequences and vast contexts, getting that internal consistency right.
It points towards architectural improvements, perhaps, focusing squarely on how models maintain and update their internal state without tripping over their own history.
A different kind of scaling challenge.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. That's all for this deep dive.